Today, he announced to his class, we're going to talk about how small choices can lead to big changes, and how sometimes the most valuable things in life can't be calculated on a calculator. Outside his classroom window, another storm was brewing. But this time, he wasn't afraid. Whatever lightning might strike, whatever changes might come, he knew who he was now. And that was worth more than all the money in the world. The sun hadn't risen yet when Mr. Kumar made his decision. He hadn't slept at all, spending the night watching the city lights and thinking about every choice that had led him to this moment. As the first hints of dawn colored the sky, he put on his best shirt, the one he usually saved for parent-teacher conferences, and drove to the regional bank headquarters. The morning guard looked surprised to see someone so early. "We don't open for another 2 hours, sir." "I know," Mr. Kumar replied, his voice steadier than he felt. "But I need to speak with someone about an urgent matter. I'll wait." And wait he did, watching bank employees arrive one by one, coffee cups in hand, giving him curious looks as they passed. Each minute felt like an hour. His phone buzzed constantly. News alerts about the upcoming press conference, messages from his worried parents, his sister asking if he was okay. Finally, at exactly 9 a.m., the bank manager arrived. Mr. Kumar stood up, smoothing his shirt. "I need to talk to you about something important," he said. "It's about the banking system glitch everyone's investigating." The manager's office was quiet except for the gentle hum of air conditioning. Mr. Kumar placed his banking statements on the desk, along with a handwritten list of everything he'd done with the money. His hands shook slightly, but his voice remained clear as he explained everything: the storm, the ATM, the multiplication of his savings. "I know what I did was wrong," he finished. "I should have reported it immediately, but I want to make it right." The manager was silent for a long moment, studying the papers. Then she picked up her phone. Mr. Kumar's heart sank. This was it. She was calling the authorities. His career, his reputation, everything he'd built, gone in an instant. But then something unexpected happened. The manager smiled. "Mr. Kumar," she said, "I think there's something you need to know. That press conference this morning, it wasn't about catching people. It was about explaining what happened." She turned her computer monitor so he could see it. On the screen was a news article that had just been published. "Cryptocurrency exchange takes responsibility for banking system anomaly." It turns out, she explained, that a major cryptocurrency exchange had a system malfunction during that storm. Their error correction protocol went haywire, trying to balance their books by making random transfers. The funny thing is, their system was actually sending real money they'd made in trading fees over the years, but never properly accounted for. Mr. Kumar sat down heavily. "You mean, the money is legally yours, all of it?" The exchange announced they're not seeking recovery of any funds, as it was their error and the amounts came from their legitimate profits. The relief was so intense he felt dizzy. But then another thought struck him. But what about the federal investigation? They were investigating the source of the glitch, not the recipients. In fact, she shuffled through some papers on her desk. "We've been monitoring how people used these unexpected funds. Most people spent it on luxury items, wild investments, gambling. But you," she held up his list, "you used it to help others, to make a difference." Tears welled up in his eyes. Weeks of fear and guilt began to melt away, replaced by something else, possibility. The manager wasn't finished. "Our bank has been looking for someone to head up our new community outreach program. Someone who understands both finance and education. Someone who knows what it means to want to help others." She gave him a meaningful look. "Would you be interested in joining our team? You could keep teaching. We'd work around your school schedule, but you'd also help us develop programs to improve financial literacy in underserved communities." Mr. Kumar thought about his students, about Mrs. Chen's granddaughter, about all the people who could benefit from learning how to manage money wisely. "I'd like that," he said softly. "I'd like that very much." Walking out of the bank that morning, he felt like a different person. The city looked brighter somehow, full of possibilities. His phone buzzed again, the school principal, wondering where he was. For the first time in weeks, he smiled as he answered it. "I'm on my way," he said. "And I have an idea for a new math lesson. Something about probability, chance, and doing the right thing." Later that day, standing before his class, he looked at the eager faces of his students. They had no idea how close he'd come to losing everything, or how much he'd gained by choosing honesty. As he began writing equations on the board, he realized that the real miracle hadn't been the money at all. It had been the chance to learn what kind of person he truly was. The room suddenly felt too small. Through his window, he could see the city lights, countless windows lit up with countless normal lives. Somewhere out there, investigators were probably working late, piecing together the puzzle. And he was just sitting here, watching it all unfold, like a man watching storm clouds gather on the horizon. He opened his laptop, staring at his banking dashboard. All those numbers, all that potential for good or for disaster. Tomorrow's press conference could change everything. As midnight approached, he realized he had a choice to make and very little time left to make it. The morning news hit like a thunderbolt. Major banking system upgrade reveals nationwide pattern of transaction anomalies. Mr. Kumar's coffee went cold as he watched the report on his phone, his breakfast untouched on the kitchen counter. The reporter spoke about a massive software update that had exposed unusual patterns in electronic transfers across the country. His hands trembled as he switched to his banking app. Everything looked normal, but the words from the news report echoed in his head. Federal investigators are examining all large, unexplained balance changes from the past 3 months. The drive to school that morning felt different. Every police car made his heart jump. The school security guard's friendly wave seemed loaded with hidden meaning. Even the morning announcements crackled with unusual tension, or maybe that was just his imagination working overtime. During third period, while his students worked on probability problems, the principal's voice came over the intercom. "Mr. Kumar, please report to the office after class." A few students looked up, but most kept working. To them, it was just another ordinary school day. The walk to the office felt like miles. Each step brought a new worry. Had they traced the anonymous donations? Had someone noticed the sudden payment of his parents' medical bills? His collar felt tight, even though he'd worn this shirt 100 times before. But it wasn't investigators waiting in the office, it was the parent of one of his students. "My son told me about the special tutoring you've been offering," she said, eyes bright with tears. "About how you stayed late to help him understand fractions. He passed his math test yesterday, first time ever." The relief was so intense he had to sit down. The principal beamed proudly, completely unaware of the storm raging in his teacher's mind. "We're lucky to have teachers who care," she said, patting his shoulder. Back in his classroom, he pulled up the news on his phone again. The investigation was expanding. They were looking at cryptocurrency exchanges, electronic transfer patterns, anything unusual. His miracle money wasn't just a private secret anymore. It was part of a nationwide puzzle that people were actively trying to solve. During lunch break, he overheard 2 teachers discussing the news. "Can you imagine?" one said. "All that money just appearing in people's accounts. What would you do if it happened to you?" "Turn it in immediately," the other replied firmly. "Money like that always comes with strings attached." Mr. Kumar's sandwich turned to ash in his mouth. He'd told himself the same thing at first, hadn't he? But then he'd seen all the good he could do, all the lives he could change. Was that wrong? The classroom posters about integrity and honesty seemed to stare down at him accusingly. That afternoon, his sister called. "The news is talking about bank errors and investigations," she said quietly. "Is everything okay?" "That money you sent for the kids' education." "Everything's fine," he assured her, even as his free hand clenched into a fist. "Just focus on the children." But after hanging up, he stared at his phone for a long time, thinking about all the connections, all the trails that led back to him. The school day ended, but he couldn't bring himself to leave. He sat at his desk, grading papers, trying to lose himself in the simple mathematics of his students' work. Simple addition and subtraction, multiplication and division, no life-changing glitches, no moral dilemmas, just pure, clean numbers doing what they were supposed to do. A noise in the hallway made him jump. It was just the janitor making his evening rounds. "Working late again, sir?" The old man smiled. "You're always here, helping these kids. My granddaughter says your class is the only one that makes sense to her." The simple comment hit him hard. He'd spent years building this. Trust, respect, a reputation for doing what's right. How quickly would it all disappear if the truth came out? The thought of his students finding out, of seeing disappointment in their eyes, was almost unbearable. At home that night, he couldn't sleep. His TV stayed on the news channel, volume low, as reporters discussed the ongoing investigation. They showed graphics of money flowing between accounts, talked about digital forensics and audit trails. Each word felt like another brick in a wall that was slowly closing in around him. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Saw something worrying on the news. Are you sure everything's okay with that money you sent us?" Before he could reply, another news alert popped up. Federal investigators announced breakthrough in banking anomaly case. Press conference scheduled for tomorrow morning. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. For now, he had papers to grade, lessons to plan, and a chance, however it had come to him, to make a real difference in people's lives. He picked up his red grading pen and got back to work, the light from his desk lamp casting a warm glow over the papers, while somewhere in the city, investigators were slowly working their way toward his miracle money. 2 weeks had passed since the storm, and Mr. Kumar's life had begun to change in subtle ways. He still drove his old car to school, still wore the same comfortable sweaters, still carried his worn leather bag. But something was different. It wasn't just the money. It was the way he carried himself, the way he looked at problems around him. During lunch break, he overheard 2 students talking about a classmate who couldn't join the upcoming school trip because of the fees. That afternoon, an anonymous donation appeared in the school's account, enough to cover not just one but all the students who couldn't afford to go. "It's a miracle," the principal announced during morning assembly. "Someone out there really cares about our kids." Mr. Kumar stood at the back of the hall, watching his students' faces light up. The warm feeling in his chest almost made up for the guilt that had been his constant companion. At home, things were changing too. He'd moved to a slightly better apartment, nothing flashy, just a place where the roof didn't leak and the heating worked properly. He told everyone it was a lucky find, a good deal from a family friend. His old neighbors had thrown him a small goodbye party, and Mrs. Chen had cried a little, saying the building wouldn't be the same without him. The wealth management meetings were the hardest part. Suit-wearing professionals would show him charts and graphs, talking about investment strategies and portfolio diversification. He'd nod along, pretending to understand, always steering them toward the most conservative options. "I prefer to keep things simple," he'd say, and they'd smile knowingly, probably thinking he was just another cautious investor. One evening, while grading papers at his new kitchen table, his phone buzzed with a news alert. "Federal investigation into cryptocurrency exchange glitches expands." His hands shook as he read the article. There were others like him out there, people who'd received unexpected windfalls during system malfunctions. Some had been caught trying to hide the money. Others had come forward voluntarily. The next day at school, he barely managed to focus on his lessons. During his geometry class, he caught himself staring out the window, wondering if federal agents were already looking into his case. A student had to ask him 3 times about an angle problem before he snapped back to reality. "Are you okay, sir?" the student asked, genuine concern in their voice. "You seem worried about something." He forced a smile. "Just thinking about some complex problems," he replied, and it wasn't entirely a lie. That evening, he did something he'd been avoiding. He made a list of everything he'd done with the money so far: his parents' medical bills, the school donations, a small fund for his sister's kids' education, help for Mrs. Chen's granddaughter's college fees. Each item on the list represented something good, something that had made someone's life better. But there was no denying that the walls were closing in. The bank called more frequently now, eager to help him optimize his investments. Each call felt like another thread connecting him to money he wasn't sure he had the right to keep. He started taking longer routes home, avoiding the ATM where it all began. Sometimes he'd stop at the park and watch families playing, children running around without a care in the world. He missed that feeling, the simplicity of life before the money, before the constant worry. One night, unable to sleep, he started browsing real estate websites, not the luxury homes his bank advisors kept suggesting, but modest properties in quiet neighborhoods. Places where he could set up after-school programs, maybe a small learning center for kids who needed extra help. The idea took root in his mind. If he was going to have this money, whether it was right or wrong, he could at least make sure it served a purpose bigger than himself. He opened his laptop and started drafting a plan, something he dreamed about during his years of teaching, but never thought possible. A foundation to help struggling students, named in honor of his first teacher who'd believed in him. As he worked through the night, the guilty knot in his stomach began to loosen just a little. The money might have come to him through a glitch, but maybe that didn't mean he had to live his whole life feeling like a glitch too. His phone lit up again, another news alert about the federal investigation. But this time, instead of panic, he felt something different. Resolution. He'd spent his life teaching kids about integrity, about facing consequences, about doing what's right even when it's hard. That night, as he sat in his apartment reviewing bank statements, his phone lit up with another call. This time, it was an automated message. This is an important notice from the Federal Banking Commission regarding recent electronic transfers. His heart stopped. The message continued, but he could barely hear it over the sound of blood rushing in his ears. As the automated voice droned on about system upgrades and transaction verification processes, he realized that his comfortable bubble of security might be about to burst. The cheap wall clock ticked loudly in the silence after he hung up. Through his window, he could see his neighbor's lights, each one representing a normal life, untouched by mysterious millions or federal banking investigations. For the first time since Friday's storm, he wondered if maybe having his old, simple life back wouldn't be such a bad thing after all. But it was too late for that now. The wheels were in motion, and all he could do was hold on and hope he hadn't made the biggest mistake of his life. Monday morning arrived with the shrill sound of his alarm clock. Mr. Kumar had barely slept all weekend, jumping at every phone notification, expecting the bank to call about the mysterious multiplication of his savings. But instead of the dreaded fraud alert, his phone displayed something entirely unexpected, an email from his bank's premium wealth management department. "Dear valued customer," the message began, "we notice you've recently had a significant increase in your account balance. We'd love to discuss investment opportunities with you." He nearly dropped his coffee mug. The bank wasn't investigating, they were trying to sell him services. His hands trembled as he opened his banking app. The money was still there, and now it showed a proper transaction history. The system listed it as an incoming transfer from something called CryptoX Global Solutions. During his morning commute, his phone rang. The school bus he usually took was crowded as always, and he had to press himself against the window to answer. "Hello?" "Good morning, sir." The voice was cheerful, professional. "I'm calling from First National Bank's Wealth Management Division. We noticed some interesting activity in your account and wanted to discuss how we can help you protect and grow your assets." "I'm at work right now," he stammered, watching his regular bus stop approach. A student from his class waved at him through the window. "Of course, sir, we completely understand. Would you like to schedule a meeting for later this week? We offer exclusive services for clients with significant portfolios like yours." His mind raced. If the bank's investment department was treating this as legitimate, maybe the money really had come from somewhere. Could it have been a crypto transfer gone wrong? He'd read about blockchain glitches in the news. "Sir? Are you still there?" "Yes, sorry. Can we schedule for Thursday afternoon?" The rest of his day felt surreal. He taught his classes on autopilot, explaining equations and checking homework, while his mind wandered to account balances and banking regulations. During lunch break, he searched online for cryptocurrency transfer errors and unexpected money legal rights. The articles he found were surprisingly hopeful. Cryptocurrency transactions, once confirmed, were nearly impossible to reverse. There were stories of people receiving incorrect transfers and legally keeping the money because the blockchain made it untraceable to its source. His phone buzzed again during sixth period. This time it was his sister. "Hey, did you really pay off Mom and Dad's medical bills? Dad's crying. He keeps saying he doesn't deserve such a good son." The knot in his stomach tightened. "I got some extra tutoring money," he lied, hating himself for it. "Please don't make a big deal about it." After school, he visited 3 different banks and opened new accounts. Diversifying, he called it in his head, though he knew he was really just making it harder to track the money. Each time, the bank officers smiled warmly, offered him coffee, called him sir in that special tone reserved for wealthy clients. At the last bank, A young officer eagerly explained their premium services. We can help you invest in mutual funds, real estate, even cryptocurrency if you're interested. At the word cryptocurrency, Mr. Kuma's ears perked up. Actually, he said carefully, I've been doing some crypto trading. The lie felt heavy on his tongue, but the officer nodded enthusiastically. Many of our clients are into crypto these days. The transactions can be quite large, can't they? That's why we've streamlined our processes for handling crypto-derived funds. Walking home that evening, he felt oddly lighter. Nobody had questioned the money's appearance. The bank systems had created their own explanation. He was just another crypto investor who'd gotten lucky. Even the timing made sense, with all the market volatility in the news. But then he saw one of his students outside the corner store, counting coins to buy dinner. The boy quickly shoved the money in his pocket, embarrassed to be seen. Mr. Kuma remembered teaching a lesson about probability and lottery tickets just last week. Money that comes too easily usually goes just as easily, he told the class. He unlocked his door, stepping into his small apartment. Everything looked exactly the same. The stack of ungraded papers, the motivational posters, the leaky faucet in the kitchen. But nothing felt the same. Somewhere in the city, a computer system was processing his transfer. By Monday morning, he would either be a quiet millionaire or in serious trouble. The choice had been made. Now he just had to live with it. The walk home from the bank felt different. Every step seemed to echo with the weight of those extra zeros in his account. Mr. Kumar clutched his warm leather bag closer, the 2 ATM receipts feeling like they were burning through his wallet. He'd forgotten all about his weekend grocery shopping plans. Instead of heading to the market, he found himself sitting on a bench in the small park near his apartment. The rain had stopped, leaving everything with that fresh, clean smell that comes after a storm. A few kids were playing in the distance, their laughter carrying across the damp grass. Their parents watched from nearby benches, probably worrying about normal things: bills, work, the upcoming school fees. He pulled out the receipts again, smoothing them carefully on his knee. The numbers hadn't changed. They stared back at him, black against white, still showing that impossible sum. His hands were shaking slightly as he took out his phone and opened his banking app. One tap, and there it was again: $2,476,780. What would you do? He whispered to himself, watching a sparrow hop closer to his feet. In his classroom, everything was clear-cut, right and wrong, mathematical truth. But this felt like one of those ethical debate questions he sometimes used to get his students thinking. The money could change everything. His parents wouldn't have to worry about their medical bills anymore. The leaky roof in his apartment, fixed. The old car that barely started on cold mornings, replaced. He thought about his students who couldn't afford lunch, about the school's broken equipment, about all the good that could be done with that kind of money. But then his father's voice echoed in his head. Money earned through wrong means brings nothing but trouble. He'd grown up hearing stories about honesty, about doing the right thing even when nobody was watching. 20 years of teaching had reinforced those values. He'd failed students for cheating, lectured about integrity, believed in those principles. He opened his phone's browser and started searching. Bank ATM malfunction, money appearing in account. Legal responsibility, wrong deposit. The results were a mix of horror stories and legal warnings. Some people had spent money that wasn't theirs and ended up in jail. Others had reported it immediately and been rewarded for their honesty. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He'd been sitting there for almost 2 hours, his untouched grocery money still in his pocket. A young couple walked past, sharing an umbrella even though the rain had stopped. They looked happy, carefree. He wondered if they ever worried about money. His phone buzzed, a text from his mother. "Beta, did you send extra money to our account? The hospital bill is showing paid." His heart stopped. He checked his account again. During the ATM glitch, had he accidentally set up a payment? No, the balance was the same. But now he had proof. The money was real enough to pay bills. He stood up suddenly, startling the sparrow. The right thing to do was obvious. Walk into the bank first thing tomorrow morning and report everything. But the bank wouldn't be open until Monday now. That meant he had the whole weekend to think about it, to imagine the possibilities, to dream. His fingers moved across his phone screen, opening another banking app. This one was for an account he'd opened years ago at a different bank but never really used. It had maybe $50 in it. After a moment's hesitation, he set up a transfer. Not all of it, that would be too suspicious. Just enough to help his parents, to fix his car, to set up a small scholarship fund for his students. It's just temporary, he told himself, watching the transfer confirmation appear. Until I figure out what's really going on. But deep down, he knew he was crossing a line. The numbers might have changed by accident, but this decision was very deliberate. Walking home in the growing darkness, he felt different. Lighter, somehow, but also heavier. In his pocket, his phone felt like it was getting heavier with each step. He'd have to be careful now. No sudden changes, no obvious signs of wealth. Just small, quiet improvements that wouldn't draw attention. As he climbed the stairs to his apartment, he paused to help Mrs. Chen from next door with her groceries. She was struggling on the narrow steps as she did every week. "Thank you," she smiled, patting his arm. "You're such a good person." The words hit him like a physical blow. Was he? A good person wouldn't be hiding this, wouldn't be making plans to use money that might not be theirs. But then again, a good person would help others if they could, wouldn't they? The thunder was still rumbling overhead when the ATM screen finally stopped its wild flickering. Mr. Kumar blinked rapidly, trying to clear his vision after all the flashing lights. His finger was still hovering over the keypad, frozen in mid-air like a conductor who'd forgotten his orchestra. The rain was coming down harder now, and he could feel drops of water hitting his neck as they blew in under the awning. "Hey, is it working?" Someone called from the line behind him. "Some of us are getting soaked out here." He meant to respond, to step aside, and let someone else deal with the temperamental machine. But then his eyes focused on the numbers on the screen, and his voice died in his throat. Where his balance should have read $2,476.82, there was a very different number staring back at him: $2,476,820. His first thought was that the screen was broken. It had to be. Numbers don't just multiply themselves by 1,000. He'd spent enough years teaching math to know that money doesn't appear out of nowhere. He pressed the balance inquiry button again, his hand shaking slightly. The same number appeared, this time with a cheerful "Thank you for banking with us" message underneath. "Sir?" This time it was the security guard, walking over with concern on his face. "Everything okay?" Mr. Kumar nodded automatically, his mind racing. The machine was still humming, but it sounded different now, almost like it was purring. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, each beat seeming to echo the impossible numbers on the screen. "I'm fine," he managed to say, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. "Just checking something." His fingers moved without conscious thought, requesting a printed receipt. The paper that slid out felt normal enough, but the numbers on it were anything but. There it was in black and white. His modest teacher's savings had somehow grown to millionaire status in the span of a lightning strike. Behind him, the line was getting restless. Someone coughed pointedly. A few people had given up and moved to the ATM across the street. The rain was coming down in sheets now, but Mr. Kumar barely noticed. His mind was racing through possibilities, each more unlikely than the last. Could it be a mistake? Surely the bank would notice. His years of careful budgeting had taught him that banks don't just lose track of money. Every penny had to come from somewhere and go somewhere. That's what he taught his students, the fundamental rules of mathematics that governed everything from their allowance to the national economy. But then again, hadn't he just been teaching his class about computer glitches? About how binary systems sometimes hiccup, how the smallest error in code can create the biggest changes in output. He'd used it as an example of why they needed to check their work, but now those same lessons were swimming through his head with new meaning. With trembling fingers, he pressed the withdrawal button. The screen prompted him for an amount. He typed in his usual $40, half expecting the machine to laugh at him. But it whirred obligingly and spat out 2 crisp $20 bills, just like it always did. The receipt printer hummed again, unprompted. This time, it produced a transaction record showing his new balance: $2,476,780. The withdrawal had gone through normally, subtracting exactly what he'd taken out. The system, whatever had happened to it, was treating these impossible numbers as completely real. Mr. Kumar carefully folded both receipts and tucked them into his wallet. His mind was already spinning with questions. What happens when you suddenly have 1,000 times more money than you should? Who do you tell? Should you tell anyone? The moral dilemmas he posed to his students during math word problems suddenly felt very real and very personal. As he stepped away from the ATM, he caught his reflection in the bank's window. He looked exactly the same slightly rumpled shirt, same worn leather bag, same worried crease between his eyebrows. But something had changed, something massive, and he had no idea what to do about it. The security guard gave him a friendly nod as he walked past, completely unaware that he'd just witnessed someone's life change forever. Outside, the storm was starting to pass, and a weak ray of sunlight broke through the clouds. Mr. Kumar stood there for a moment, rain dripping from his hair, holding his $40 in grocery money while his mind grappled with numbers that could change everything. He'd always told his students that mathematics was beautiful because it was reliable. Numbers don't lie, he'd say. But now, with those impossible digits burning a hole in his pocket, he wasn't so sure anymore. What he did know was that the next few hours would determine not just his future, but the kind of person he really was. Life has a funny way of changing when you least expect it. For Mr. Kumar, it was just another typical Friday afternoon in Seattle. The clouds hung low, threatening rain, nothing unusual for a city known for its drizzles and coffee shops. As a middle school math teacher for the past 8 years, his routine was as predictable as the equations he taught his students. His small apartment above the local bookstore wasn't much, but it was home. The walls were covered with motivational posters he'd collected over the years, mostly featuring mathematical concepts explained through everyday situations. His students often joked that he could turn anything into a math problem, even the way he budgeted his monthly salary. That Friday started like any other. He'd spent the morning helping his students understand the concept of compound interest, trying to make it relevant to their young minds. One day, he told them with a smile, "You'll thank me when you're managing your own money." Little did he know how ironically those words would echo in his mind just hours later. After the final bell rang and the last student shuffled out of his classroom, he gathered his worn leather bag filled with ungraded homework assignments. His wallet contained exactly $2,476.82, what remained of his monthly salary after paying rent, utilities, and helping his elderly parents with their medical bills. It wasn't much, but he'd learned to make it work. The walk to the ATM was part of his end-of-week ritual. Every Friday, he'd withdraw $40 for weekend groceries. He knew exactly what he needed: some vegetables from the local market, bread from the family-owned bakery down the street, and if he was lucky, maybe a small treat from the discount section. He had his budget down to the cent, a fact that both amused and concerned his fellow teachers. The bank's ATM sat in a small alcove, protected from the elements by a faded blue awning. The machine had been there for as long as anyone could remember, its worn keypad a testament to countless transactions. The screen flickered slightly. It always did that in damp weather, but nobody ever complained. It worked, and in a world of constant upgrades and changes, there was something comforting about its reliability. As he waited in line, he couldn't help but overhear the conversation between two teenagers in front of him. They were discussing their dreams of becoming millionaires, making plans for money they didn't have yet. He smiled, remembering his own youthful fantasies of striking it rich. But years of teaching had taught him that true wealth wasn't just about numbers in a bank account, it was about making a difference in people's lives. Finally, it was his turn. He pulled out his wallet, the leather cracked and soft from years of use. The debit card inside was similarly worn, its numbers fading from countless swipes. As he inserted the card into the machine, a few drops of rain began to fall, creating small dark spots on his light blue shirt. He punched in his PIN, the same 4 digits he'd been using since college, and waited for the familiar menu to appear. The screen seemed a bit slower than usual today, probably due to the weather. He could hear the gentle hum of the machine's internal workings, a sound he'd never really paid attention to before. Behind him, more people were joining the line, huddled under umbrellas as the rain picked up pace. He pressed the buttons for a withdrawal, his fingers moving automatically through the familiar sequence. That's when everything changed. A bright flash of lightning lit up the sky, followed almost immediately by a crack of thunder that made everyone jump. The ATM's screen flickered violently, its usual blue glow replaced by a rapid succession of random characters and numbers. In a moment of panic, his fingers instinctively pressed several buttons, trying to cancel the transaction. Looking back, he would never be able to recall exactly which buttons he pressed in that chaotic moment. All he knew was that when the screen finally stabilized, his life would never be the same. But right then, standing in front of the temperamental ATM, he was just a regular teacher trying to get his weekly grocery money before the rain really started pouring. Little did he know that this ordinary Friday was about to become the most extraordinary day of his life. The universe, it seemed, had decided that a simple math teacher's careful calculations were due for a dramatic revision.